Mankind was a part of creation, and his destiny, like that of the rest of creation, is to utter, or to set free, the vocal music which this manifestation of the One sacramentally is, provided that the demon Discord, or Saltu in the allegory, the rival of the creatrix Inini, who wars against chaos, provided discord does not silence it. And that, to use the imagery of the creation epic, the dragon, Chaos, does not engulf it in her hungry maw. The meaning of the 7 tables of destiny and of the 50 names of the Creator might have remained in impenetrable mystery, but for the survival into Greek times of the 7 Greek harmoniae, with their linkage with the 7 heavenly bodies, and the recent rediscovery. The harmonia suggest that the 7 are simply the interrelated ratios of the intervals between the 8 musical sounds of the octave, which, in the view of the early philosophers, provided such elegant testimony to the unifying organic order in the cosmos, not merely operating in manifestation, but being its very essence. In that manifestation consisted in the musically uttered words of God, constituting, according to number and measure, the reasoned exponents of form, the song and the poem of all which is. For the probable explanation of the 50 creative names of the Creator, which help us to understand the ancient concept of unity, we can turn hopefully to the northwest India. There survives in the Tantras an early religious philosophy, rooted in a system out of which grew the Vedic hymns, and then later the Upanishads. That system may well have come into India along with the Indus Valley culture, which obviously had a cousinship with that of Mesopotamia. In the Tantras, there exists to this day an interpretation of the 50 Varnas, or letters, of Kali's garland. That certainly seems to have been originally rooted in the scientific harmonia, which, as has been explained, was a unit in itself, but a differentiated unity comprising 49 natural sequences of mathematically connected frequency ratios, or musical intervals. The voice, the most perfect of all free reed and resonator instruments, can sing these natural scales, and stringed instruments can be laboriously attuned to them. But it is only in the pipe, as we have seen, that the natural mathematical sequences of vibration ratios are born with an inevitable result of equal measure, so that they become, as it were, a demonstration in a different category of phenomena of equal measure. It is the pipe alone which thus proves the hidden unity resulting from the operation of this natural law. It was a natural exemplar of a unit that was and could be embodied only arbitrarily in the Mesopotamian rationalization already mentioned, in which a hollow cube of a given size, weighing a given amount, a 60th of a unit, also containing a corresponding 60th of water, which then emptied from a vessel of that given capacity at a given rate of flow, occupied a corresponding 60th of time in the process, and which basic cube also provided the standard linear measure. In all probability, the vessel holding the water was also so shaped and constructed that with graded amounts of water in it, it rang the standard notes of the octave scale, or at all events it rang the keynote, possibly one of 60 vibrations to the second. Since a second is both a unit and also a 60th part, this would be roughly a B natural note, according to what is known as the philosophical scale, lower in pitch than our present standard instrument tuning. This rationalization, albeit arbitrary, was intended to demonstrate in practice a unity otherwise known to exist, doubtless from scientific experiment with sound vibrations and pipes and strings. If I may so put it, it was a scientific sacrament. The inner truth greatly transcended the visible declaration of it, but this was a sincere effort to harmonize outward expression with inward truth. The theory of the Varnamala, the garland of letters, is very interesting, linking, as it does, the earliest known scientific study of the musical sounds of human utterance and the esoteric meaning of mantras. It has been set forth succinctly in English by Sir John Woodcroft in the volume in which he published his collected papers on the Mantra Shastra. This gives so clear an insight into the most ancient Eastern ideas of divine unity, and is so little known, that I make no apology for detailing it here. It is a peculiarity of Greek, Egyptian, and Sanskrit that in these languages there is a single word for that which we, in English, need two. The compound voice word. In Greek, logos implies both voice and word. It also, and at an earlier date, carried the suggestion of reason, because logos was ratio. In Egyptian religious texts, makru, itself originally a compound, also means the speaker and the word being spoken, the voice word. It carries also the suggestion of justness and truth having the force of law, of an accurate relation between creativeness and the thing created. A holy man or saint, for instance, was such a realization in absolute veracity of the creative voice, and this was the ancient Egyptian religious philosophy of the Pyramid period. It was echoed later in the Alexandrian Hermetic literature allegorically. Thoth, the word of Tum being at once the all and the void, rationalizing itself in creation, manifesting in Ra, the light. The mystic lotus, emerging as a name from Nun or chaos, and doing all of this by virtue of law, of Ma'at. Teuti, or Thoth, was the golden germ born from that lotus, and thus Thoth the embodiment of the just tones. He abode in the city of the eight, and his sounds were 7. In Sanskrit, the feminine noun vak, from the root vach, to speak, likewise means both voice and also the word uttered. In Indian religious philosophy, vak is the mother of the triune expression of Brahman, namely Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra. Later, Rudra became Shiva. The great universe, the cow, is Vak Virat. The power, Shakti, or the energy of the Brahman, was Vak. So she went out from the one, Brahman, as his word, and gave a name to, or produced, the universe of the many. Vak is personified as Sarasvati, the flowing, the source of the inspiration of the poets of the Vedas, and the mother of the chief of all Vedic meters, associating the 6 and the 8. Gayatri was the first among the 7 principled meters. Brahman, in uttering Vak, expires the divine wind, or vital breath, with the sound Chang, and again inspires with the sound Sa. Chang Sa is thus the natural name for the divine male-female bird, which is the vital breath, Vayu, of the one manifesting in the life or existence of all creatures. They become, by reason of that mutuality of awareness of the one as many, in which the subject and object are differentiated, albeit still in unity. When the one self sees itself as object, creation is taking place. It takes place as a vibration or wave motion, which is sound, shabda, from the root shabd, to make sound, and which is the natural name of the thing thus brought into existence. Indian philosophers differentiate sound that is non-musical, dhvani, from sound that is described as lettered sound, or sound having meaning, artha. But only those shabdas which are natural names for things can continue forever. The others are ephemeral. Vedic language consists of those sounds that are eternal. The utterance of Brahman was the lettered sound Aum, and its meaning, object or artha, is the total universe. From the supreme vibration Aum, which is the sound uttered by the One, all letters, and also all non-musical sounds, issue. The actual sounds issuing from the human mouth are formed by the free vibration of the cartilaginous plates of the vocal cord membranes in that perfect wind-blown pipe, the human throat, for which the mouth cavity or cavern serves as the resonator. These continuous sounds, piped or breath-blown by the human flute, are the vowels, differing in shape according to variations in the shape of the cavity. The consonants are the interruptions of these sounds, which cut them, as it were, into lengths, but the consonants of themselves are dumb. So the vowel is the enabling power, the shakti, of the consonant. The varnas, or letters, are the sounds differentiated according to pronunciation, dependent on the plate and manner of their production, as in the throat, guttural, the lips, the labials, the teeth, the dentals, and so on. These uttered letters, varnas, are made up into syllables and groups of syllables, pada, or pedes, feet, as we say, make the words. From these, then, mantras are made. Such an uttered sound is held to be the gross or outward naming of things thought and created by reason of being so named in the subtle world of spirit. To utter these names is to bring into existence the things that they signify. Such mantras are held to be the nearest possible human or material approximation to the ideal name of the thing to be heard only by the inner or spiritual ear. Hence, when one of these basic names is uttered, such as Aum, Hansa, Ram, or Hrim, the human being uttering it of a set purpose is then creating in the spiritual sphere that very thing. Ram, for example, brings into being the concept behind the gross or material name. Agni comprises fire, sun, and lightning, and all the things of thought, all of the things thought of when the eternal and the one is conceived as manifesting in sun, and in all that sun implies, including order and generation. The linkage between these connected ideas approximating the serialization of creation is a relationship of order, as in meter, or in the logic of interdependent musical notes, chandra, so that the combination of thought, vocal utterance, and bringing into existence by naming, by means of stressed and measured causal sounds, is the recreating by man of something archetypical, which that was and is accomplished by the natural laws of harmony, which, as I've explained earlier, depends on the ratio of sound wave frequencies one to another and to the octave scale comprising a sequence from first note to its doubling on the eighth note and providing 7 intervals. The outward ear will hear only the rhythmically uttered words, or mantras, but the inner ear hears because the inner instrument of reason utters, the one in the essentially musical act of creation. Such is the Tantric theory. According to this theory, as it is at present held in India, we have, in those uttered sounds, the musical archetypal language of which the different tongues of mankind are but dialects, and to which Sanskrit is the nearest approach. For example, the sound gaur, which is Sanskrit for cow, is the human utterance approximating the eternal constructive sound for the animal recognizable as the Indian female buffalo. The Tantric considers that there are comparatively few approximate natural names which are fundamental sounds. He believes that certain combinations of these, according to a secret order, which he claims to be the order of natural harmony, although by that, apparently, he does not now mean the natural order of the harmonia, which is unknown to him, as is probably the mathematical basis of any kind of harmony. He believes that these form the universal Vedic language of creation. He believes that the fundamental sounds are the varnas, or letters. In the eternal order, krama, of the combination of these varnas lies their creative potency. For individually, although any one varna is as potent as another, each one containing within itself the cosmos in miniature, they must be built into combinations if they are to become actively creative. The Tantric holds that the physical vibrations of a single varna may be resolved into component vibrations, which are harmonic. This is, in fact, a perfectly good description of what the ordinary person takes to be a simple musical note, as heard on any one instrument, which is not a single sound at all, but a fundamental, reinforced by some or all of its accordant overtones up to the limiting octave. The linked 50 of them constitute the Varnamala, the garland of letters. The garland is worn by Kali, the devourer of time, the horrific figure of Indian religious imagery which represents that part of the concept of creation that implies the rhythmic resolution of nothingness of all that is taken form by the operation of causal sound. These claims for the Vedic universal language cannot be substantiated in actual fact if the varnas are merely spoken syllabic sounds equating the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. If, however, the varnas were originally notes, or vibration frequencies, individuated actually as to 7 of them, but as to 49 only relatively, by reason of their relationship or ratio to the 7 different source notes of the harmonia, a natural scale of logically graded parts existing within that natural group, the octave. And if they were considered as being produced by the free reed flute of the human voice, why, then, all the above claims are scientifically justified, and the analogy would be perfect. We should then at once understand the logic of the symbolism of the 49 Vedic maruts, those airs, that are the sons of Vayu, the vital breath or wind, which airs in Indian Vedic allegory issue from the cavern and reduce chaos to divine order. Quite a number of hymns of the Rig Veda support this interpretation, and the corresponding interpretation of much allegory and of certain ritual scenes in Egyptian cosmic religious philosophy becomes likewise clear and logical. We should then also understand why the Tower of Babel, with its 7 stages representing the sun, the 5 planets, and the moon, should have had attached to it, by the Hebrews, the allegory of the diversified languages of the human race, which certainly rested on something more rational than a pun. Indeed, the clue would seem to have been preserved for us in a rather extraordinary manner in the medieval Irish manuscript known as the Ogham Tract, translated and annotated by George Calder, Edinburgh, 1917, wherein an elaborate attempt is made to relate cosmic creation starting from the octave to a kind of ideal philological grammar, and to prove that the Gaelic is one of the 72 dialects originally learned by the 72 poet-seers within a 10-year period of the archetypal language taught by the Ancient of Days, or Chronos, in the Tower of Nimrod. This was no historical king, but Nimrod the Hunter, the grandson, as the tract points out, of Noah, the Hebrew version of the Babylonian Ziusudra or Utnapishtim, who is, as we know from the Mesopotamian allegory, the dramatic character representing the sun chasing across the sky. In the Irish allegory, the tower was built by Adam's children, the Adamu, as we also know from the Mesopotamian allegory, being mankind. In man's character as son of the divine being who created him and gave him part of his own logos, with the freedom to share in the continuous creative act. The actual tower, or ziggurat, at Babylon, or Babel, or Bab-El, the gate of El, was a pyramidal structure in the 7 diminishing stages, the moon stage being at the apex. It appears to have represented the manifestation of the One in creation, especially as that One, whose sacred unit number was 60, was the unit of all the Mesopotamian measures, and was externalized in the sublime order of the spheres, demonstrated in such awe-inspiring fashion by the motions of the heavenly bodies. This actual temple, also, represented the ideal cube, measuring 120 cubits per side, of which the Mesopotamian flood allegory tells, wherein Ziusudra saves creation from resumption into the ocean, chaos by embarking representatives of all living things in his ark, which is the cube, the basis not only of all Mesopotamian rationalizing of measures and weights, but also the symbol of the creatress mother Enini. The Jewish philosopher Philo, who absorbed Alexandrian philosophy without ceasing to be a Jew, and who may thus be supposed to have inherited the traditional teaching about the cosmos, not only of the Greeks, who got it from elder sources, but of the Egyptians and the Chaldeans, has had a good deal that is interesting to say about cubed numbers, and the number 7. In Philo's treatise On the Creation of the World, quoted above, which is a detailed commentary on Genesis, he states, for example, that time is the interval of the motion of the heavens, and that there is no such thing as beauty in disorder, and that a man would be far wrong who should say that in all these things there might be discovered that archetypal and real model music, the images of which the subsequent generations of mankind engraved in their own souls, and in this way handed down the art which is the most necessary and most advantageous to human life. 4, he points out, is the number of the cube, and speaking of the curious properties of the number 7, he points out that in the 7th number increasing immediately from the unit in a twofold ratio, namely the number 64, is a square formed by the multiplication of 8 by 8, and it is also a cube by the multiplication of 4 and 4, 4 times. He who begins with the number 64 and combines them in a doubling ratio will make the 7th number 4096, which is both a square and a cube, having 64 as its square root and 16 as its cube. which, no doubt, is precisely why the 64 hexagrams of the Chinese classical, equated as they were with the motions of the heavenly bodies and with the octave of musical sounds, seemed to Confucius to contain something essential, which, given a few more years, he might have mastered, by which he meant he would have mastered in the changes of the Yi, the secret of the universe. All of this may appear to be somewhat extravagant, but it is certain that intellectual men, such as Philo and Confucius, apprehended something deeper than mere numbers in the changes and sequences which were held to be musical. It is certain that they and others of the East saw in the natural law of harmony the verisimilitude of the relation between God and his universe, and between the integral parts of the universe as they are demonstrated in creation itself. It is indeed passing strange that we should find in this Irish tract the missing link binding together the age-old Mesopotamian idea of God and creation as a differentiated unity of creation, as the manifestation of the Deus Unicus, according to a divine order consisting in proportion or ratio, and that other Eastern idea of God and creation as a divine sound issuing in vocal musical sounds, connected together in a series of interrelated vibration sequences which are inevitable in nature and whose relationship consists essentially in proportion or ratio. The 7 graded steps of the harmonia within the octave each give rise to a series of 7 graded steps, theoretically 49 intervals in all. But if we count each note in each sequence as an individual sound and include the 8th note of the octave, they may well be 50 letters from which the divine creative speech might be built into words or names. The simile is just because the harmonia intervals in themselves are not music. They are the framework, or the acoustical grammar, within which melodies are composed, and the individual notes which receive their value from the mutual relation. Each bears to the completed scale determined from the first interval. They are the bricks with which the tune structures may be built, while the particular mode lends the structure its special ethos. No note of itself is music. It becomes so solely by reason of its ratio to other notes within the mode, and hence by reason of its proportion to the whole. The genius of the devout thinkers who first realized the divine manifestation of the unique being could be no other than this vocal musical speech with its sublime law of harmony and its potentiality of exquisite beauty, is something which can only stir us to profound admiration. This man, whoever he may have been, was the world's arch-poet, the world's first great singer. The allegory writers all represented the demiurge as a musician, a flautist, a guitarist, or a harpist, and the seers as both poets and musicians. In fact, as well as in allegory, the seer sang metrically, and the musician's music had a constructive meaning. In this idea of the cosmos as music, performed by a poet, there is first and above all the profound recognition of the majesty and beauty of the One, the central reality of which all else is expression, to which all else is relative and, moreover, related proportionately. Then there is the clear insight into some of the deepest mysteries that have baffled human intellect. For example, the nature of the real and the eternal, which actually is beyond our comprehension, but which is yet apprehended by us through this very relativity, in which we see the one and the eternal becoming, as it were, graspable by our finite intellect, by reason of that one's serialization as time and through spatial extension as matter, which is time's other face. For this serialization is governed by proportioned number. We are led to see the two great agencies of time regulation in the sun and the moon, revealing an important part of the essential character of the divine one. No wonder that the poetry of early mankind waxed lyrical in their praise as showing us the very countenance of God. Yet there is more, much more in this wonderful perception of how the one manifested in the many. Our individual relationship to the one is seen as essentially a relationship of the many to the one. We are part of the one, and no one creature is intrinsically of greater value than another, or of lesser import, and each is a microcosm of the cosmos. And yet there can be no harmony, no manifestation of the one, on our part, except in so far as our relation with one another is just. And there can be no creative music except as we play our part relatively to all the other individuals and to the aggregate in our just proportion, thus building up the sum that is God's whole, a differentiated, harmonized unity. It is a particularly far-seeing realization of truth in that it accepts the differences arising from the individualities in all creatures, and perceives that there can be no dead level of equality, since that would not be music. The equal value, on the contrary, lies in the fact that each individual entity, by reason precisely of different ratio, is necessary to the complete sequence of the divine order that is God. Variety of melody there must be, as there is variety of mode. What would existence be worth were it not so? The only dead level is non-entity, as the only sin is discord, disequilibrium. Why should manifestation take place at all, if not to realize by differentiated relation the sublime beauty that is music? The genius who first perceived all this had no need to represent to himself the compassionate nature of the divine being. It was luminously self-evident. The smallest sparrow was yet, as it were, the keystone of the arch. Every part of this whole was of different value, functionally, yet every part was equally essential to its summation as a whole. None the less, for the weaker brethren, this arch-poet gave to mankind his other poem about the Great Mother. Because each one of us, whatever experience of life we may miss, has known what it is to be born of and to be dependent on a mother, who, in the normal procedure of nature, puts the life and well-being of her offspring before her own, and, in the higher forms of animal life, sustains her young, both before and after birth, with the very essence of her own body. That we might remember that the mother image is but an image of a still more profound reality. The oldest religious symbolization of the Creatress pictures her quite as frequently with a musical instrument, the kitara, as it does with a babe in her arms.